Todaiji, which translates to Great Eastern Temple. So, as you probably remember from our previous slides, Japan's early history was marked by several lengthy conflicts. So this building has actually, in many capacities, been destroyed and then rebuilt several times. So at its inception, it served as Japan's principal temple after the introduction of Buddhism around 550 CE. Its construction wasn't begun until about 200 years thereafter, though. So Buddhism, much like it did in China, came to be associated with the imperial court, and Buddhism itself would later serve as a unifier for the entire country after centuries of squabbles. So the emperor, after a certain amount of time, basically said, y'all need to calm down. This is Buddhism. Everybody's welcome here. Please don't destroy the temple again. So Todaiji is the largest wooden building in the world, and it employs undressed wood. So there's this notion that a natural grain and color is desired. This is pretty popular in Zen Buddhism. It is intended to encourage contemplation and balance and peace. You can imagine that if a building is extremely colorful or busy, that's not really conducive to meditation. So oftentimes you'll see very neutral color palettes as well as heavy integrations with nature. So when you look at these images in particular, you can see that they're surrounded by greenery and trees. So they're really intended to be integrated with the natural environment. So the problem is, though, that when you have these extremely large wooden buildings, you basically deplete the large growth forests. So in the construction and reconstruction of Todaiji and its various buildings, the Japanese experienced several issues. They really prized cypress, which is this tree that grows very tall, and the grain typically goes in a single direction, which makes it ideal for construction. So when the Todaiji was rebuilt, it actually had to be smaller than its original construction because of the fact that the forests were depleted. So that's one of the things that was shaping architecture after 1200, was that buildings were becoming smaller because there wasn't as much wood to go around. So Todaiji is a phrase that means Great Eastern Temple. So Todaiji is located in Nara, which was once the capital of Japan. Nara is famous for its deer population. You can see in this image over here that there's a little deer in the corner. It is said that when you go to Nara, and particularly Todaiji, the deer are extremely tame. A lot of them have actually learned how to bow to people, so they'll duck their heads, and then a lot of people have started feeding them, which is why they're so tame. So another feature of Todaiji is the fact that it houses the largest metal statue of Buddha in the world. It's a massive statue of the Virocana Buddha. I will show you a couple of images on the next slides. So this is the Daibutsu-den, or Great Buddha Hall. The word Daibutsu refers to the Buddha. This right here is the Great South Gate, or Nandaimon. It employs this complicated wood bracketing system, which was a technique that was imported from Korea to create these very large and structurally sound wooden buildings. So this was built after the initial temple was burned down around 1100 CE. So you can see this pagoda style that we've seen over and over again in East Asian architecture being emulated here. So on the other side of Nandaimon are these Nioh Guardian figures who were carved by Unkei. So these structures were created using joined woodblock construction. So again, this complex wood bracketing system. Neither of these statues are constructed using a single block of wood. So incredibly, these statues are more than 26 feet tall, and they're made of cypress, which is that same high quality wood that was used in the building construction of Todaiji. What you'll notice when you look at these figures is that they're very animated. Their faces are quite angry looking, their bodies are muscular, and they're in these S-shaped contrapposto poses. So you might see some similarities here to the Hindu artwork that we saw earlier in the unit in terms of the S-shaped forms of the figures, these kind of rhythmic dance poses. In terms of the figures' animated nature, their kind of scary faces and muscular bodies, there's a lot of similarities to the Vajrapani figures from the Longmen Caves, so those lightning bearers that are flanking the Buddha to protect him. So there's a similar purpose here for these two figures. They're intended to protect the Buddha, who is typically this very placid and peaceful-looking figure. The animated bodies and faces of these figures are also reflective of the warrior-centered culture of the Kamakura era, which is, again, this period that's marked by lots of conflict and violence between rival clans in Japan. So this is the Great Buddha, or Daibutsu, as he is called in Japanese. He is the largest metal Buddha statue in the entire world, at 50 feet high. He doesn't look particularly large in this picture, but I'll show you on the next slide. There's a couple of people standing next to it, and that really conveys the sense of scale here. So this was a monumental feat of casting. It took around 10 years to build and required virtually all of the copper in Japan available. So this Buddha and its creation and the construction of the temple around it basically required a tax on every single person that was living in Japan at the time, and the emperor enforced this tax basically as a unifier and to be like, we're all contributing to the construction of this temple, but of course that drew a lot of ire from people and was probably one of the reasons that the temple was burned down around 1200 CE. Right here, it's difficult to see this mudra right here because it is obscured by these metal lotus images right here, but these are mudras right here that are basically signaling do not fear and welcome. So this would have been very significant during this wartime, basically saying like, things are okay, we're chill now, everybody's welcome here, please stop fighting. What you'll also notice around this Buddha is this golden halo motif. You can see these little seated figures surrounding him. These are Bodhisattvas. You can't really see the base in this image right here, the predella, but there's also images along the base of the predella that correspond to Buddha's life. So this is an image that really demonstrates the scale of this massive Virocana Buddha. You can see people here for scale. So, and when you look in the roof area of this Daibutsu, then you can see the complex wood bracketing system that is holding this entire complex together. So I also wanted to show you an image of what Todaiji looked like in its original construction. Again, this complex has burned down several times, and unfortunately, because cypress grows so slowly, the forests weren't replenished enough for them to return the structure to its original splendor. So this is a ground plan of the Todai-ji complex. The structures that are in black are existing structures, whereas the structures that are outlined in this kind of like white line and are not solid on the inside were the part of the original structure. So you'll notice immediately that the Daibutsu-den, the main hall where the Buddha statue is, used to actually be much larger. And again, the size had to be reduced because of the lack of resources to create them. There also used to be these two massive 9-story pagodas flanking the main complex. And of course, those could not be built anymore without the cypress. So this is the location of the Great South Gate down here, or Nandaimon. And then this is the Daibutsu-den right here, and then this circle right here is the Buddha statue. All right, on to our last work, Ryōan-ji, which basically translates to Peaceful Dragon Temple. So this was essentially a Zen center for the elite. A lot of wealthy Japanese Buddhists would experience a microcosm of nature by visiting this place, which is currently in Kyoto, Japan. So remember that Buddhism is frequently associated with the elite, which is kind of ironic considering the origins of Buddhism. So remember that Zen Buddhism is derived from Chan Buddhism, which is this sect of Buddhism that focuses on the meditation as a pathward towards enlightenment. There's also lots of references to Shinto, which is the indigenous Japanese religion that focuses on the worship of nature deities. So of course we're going to see nature featuring as a prominent theme in these kinds of places. So there is a wet garden and a dry garden. So a wet garden is what you would typically see when you think of the word garden. You have plants, you have water features, you have bridges, you have places to sit. There's a little tea house that you can see in the back right here. There's a bridge in the corner. This is basically a diorama of a microcosm of nature. Everything inside of this garden has been strategically planted and placed to look natural. However, beyond the surface level, everything has been planted to look as pretty as possible for as many times of the year as possible. So they'll oftentimes have evergreens that are placed strategically so that there's some greenery at all times of the year. Additionally, they will choose plants that flower at slightly different times of the year so that there's always something pretty to look at. So this is an example of the wet garden right here. Whereas there's also a dry garden. So a dry garden is what you would typically associate with a quote-unquote Zen garden. And these are intended to be dioramas of larger natural phenomena. So the rocks might represent mountains or stars or islands, and the gravel around them is intended to emulate the water, the sky, or the sea. So for example, this could be an example of a diorama of an ocean, and the rocks are the ocean, and then the rake patterns that are created are the wave patterns and undulations of the waves in the ocean, and then the rocks are the islands that are jutting out from the ocean. It could also be the stars that are twinkling on the night sky, or mountains peaking above a sea of mist. So this dry garden contains strategically grouped rock outcroppings. It's not fully visible from any one point of view, which is encouraging movement around the viewing gallery of the garden right here. The dry garden, as you'll notice, like to our Western eyes, doesn't seem particularly exciting. The colors are very neutral and monochromatic. Things are very still. So this is, again, really conducive towards meditation if things are not moving around and being distracting. So going back to the wet garden, so the wet garden surrounds a pond and includes plants and bridges that have been grouped in these specific orientations that are intended to be visually pleasing. Oftentimes the water from the pond is used in purification rituals, and the pond is flanking this tea house right here. And again, you'll remember that tea houses and tea ceremonies are heavily associated with Zen Buddhism. So this is an example of a water feature within Ryōan-ji, and this is the very famous Kinkaku-Ji, or Golden Pavilion, which is located in the wet garden of the temple. So again, you'll notice this double pagoda construction. So this is an overall map of Ryōan-ji right here. This is the water feature, and then this is where the rock garden is.